So, good afternoon, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here with our fantastic poet, Maria Mazziotti Gillan. So, please, a big round of applause. So, it's going to be like a very informal chat, like we always do. And maybe we will start off with a few questions. Then we will ask you to ask our questions, because I'm sure there will be many questions from the floor. And maybe we can read some poems. Okay. All right. So, Maria, I'm sure you've been asked these questions 50 million times. Can you tell us, can you reconstruct a little bit your approach to poetry and how you started to delve into your Italian-American heritage?
When I first started writing poetry, I was imitating the poetry I read and loved. And I was very lucky in grammar school that teachers read English poetry, American poetry out loud to us. And I began to hear the music in poetry in English. In my house, we spoke Italian. I thought it was real Italian, but it was an Italian dialect. I didn't realize there was a difference, but it was beautiful to me. But then the English in poetry seemed to me to have its own kind of music, a different music from Italian. So when I went to college, I studied English and I studied poets and I studied writers from mostly at that point, mostly studied American English literature and a little bit of world literature, a little bit. And I really fell in love with story and the way I was pulled into books and the way books in essence transported me out of my own life, which was a poor life, a poor person's life, a life of having to make do. But in books, I could find a kind of magic carpet to take me to another place, way beyond anything I could have imagined. And when my first book was published, I had come back to graduate school. I got a master's degree when I was a young woman. And then I went back when my children were, I don't know, 12 or 13 years old. And I went back to graduate school and I started taking classes again. And my first book was published in 1980. And when that book was published, one of my graduate school professors said to me, "It's in the poem about your father that you find the story you have to tell." And so maybe somebody would be interested in the story of a woman who did not speak English when she went to school, who was raised in a household where poverty was paramount, although it was never mentioned. My mother never mentioned it and never sort of pretended we weren't. And we were quite happy. One year my father had surgery on his back and we ate farina and spaghetti and bread every day for a year. But I never felt deprived. I thought it was really good. I liked it. I still like it. And so we weren't made to feel that we were poor, except when we went out into the world. When we went out to the world, then we made to feel that we were Italian, we were wrong, we weren't American, we weren't like the other people in America, that we had some deep flaw that made us not rich. And so what that professor said to me is in this poem about your father, that you find straight out to tell. It was like some gigantic light bulb went on in my head. And I thought, maybe I can write about being Italian American. Maybe I can write about going to school and not being able to speak English when I first got to school. So I was always afraid the Italian word would come out of my mouth. And maybe I can write about being a wife, a mother, a granddaughter, a grandmother, growing up in a poor place, eating what was essentially peasant food, which I love, I have to say. It makes me very happy. Pastina makes me very happy. Polenta makes me very happy. Homemade bread makes me very happy because it reminds me of my mother. Anyway, that professor was a very upper middle class man, gave me the courage to start writing about my life. I thought I had to write about Greek gods and be very, very esoteric and very intellectual. I didn't want people to think I was a dumb little immigrant from a tenement in Patterson. So I was always afraid that they would think that and dismiss me because of that. And he gave me the courage to say, hey, this is who I am. If you don't like it, it's you.
Thank you so much, Maria. So, just by this description, you highlighted the importance that teachers have in somebody's life. So you're not just a poet and a writer and an artist, but you're also a great teacher. Can you expand on this role and the importance of teaching in the student's life? Here you have a lot of students of ours, and can you please motivate them also and inspire them?
For me, teaching is not so much a profession as a calling. And I didn't think I wanted to be a teacher because I was very shy. I always say I barely spoke until I was 24. I was afraid of everything. I was a coward, chicken, I used to call myself. But then in teaching, I found a way, as I had in poetry, to say something about the person I am and about what I wanted to give to the students. And what I love is that the students follow me years after they've been in my class. They write to me to tell me about their successes. They keep in touch. My one big regret is that I had a teacher in 5th grade, Miss Farrow, who treated me as though I were her child, who read beautiful poems to us in English, and who would pass me and touch my head. Or now today you can't even do that, but she would touch my head or touch my arm, and I felt loved and accepted in the way that I was not really loved and accepted the rest of the time. Not by my family, but what I saw in America, which was a lot of prejudice against Italian America, and a lot of feeling that they were lower class and not to be, not quite right, not right. I always felt that I was wrong in some way. My hair was wrong, too frizzy. My skin was too dark. You know, all the things, and I call it the crow. The crow sits on your shoulders and tells you what's wrong with you. Your hair is too frizzy. It bunches out from your head like a big kinky tent. I had more negative things to say about myself, and it was all in the voice of the crow. And I tell my students, if you want to write, you have to knock that crow off your shoulder, because your crow takes away your courage. That one doesn't work. Is that what he's telling me? I've been battling away here and it doesn't. Nobody hears me. Okay, does this work? Yes, thank you. You didn't hear anything of what I said. Lovely. My daughter said, what do you mean? They can hear you in China. Anyway, what was I saying? I don't remember. The crow sits on your shoulders. It has in his voice, he has in his voice the voice of every person who's told you what is wrong with you. You're too short, you're too fat, you're too tall, you're too thin, you're not American enough, you're lower class, you're a pain in the ass, whatever. All those things are part of what the crow says to you. And when the crow speaks, you're afraid to move forward. I think in order to tell the truth in poems, you have to be willing to move down to a very deep place inside yourself. I call that place the cave. And in the cave, sit every experience you ever had, every negative experience, every horrible experience, every good experience. They're all in the cave. The cave is dark, and you have to be brave to go in there and to take that material that's part of your life, your memory, your pain, your suffering, your loss, all of that. You have to be able to put that into your work and be honest in your work. My mother was horrified when my first book came out. She said, why didn't I make up this life of leisure and privilege? And I said, because I didn't have a life of leisure and privilege. How can I make that up and put it in my work? She wanted me to write the kinds of poems that are on the back of mass cards. You know, those kind of poems. And she said, when I was in third grade in Italy, we learned a lot of poems about flowers. Why can't you write poems about flowers? That's not the kind of poems I write, Ma. What are you going to do? And it wasn't until my first book was published in translation in Italian that I think my mother really understood what I was doing. Until then, she thought I was embarrassing her, or that I was in some way making fun of her, which I never made fun of her. And sometimes I teased her a little bit, but not in my poems, because she was a very strong woman. She rose against all odds. She continued to work hard to move forward no matter what. And she wouldn't take you lying down on the floor and crying. Up, you have to get moving, get moving, get moving. And she's taught me a lot. I've tried to teach my children the same lessons. And I try to teach my students the idea that when you're knocked down, you can't lie there and feel sorry for yourself. You're going to be knocked down. You're going to be rejected. Pick yourself up and say, I'm going forward. And you go forward. And no matter what. And public people said, you're never going to be anything. I remember one teacher I was probably in 7th grade, and she went up and down the aisles and she said, you will go to college, you will not. You will go to college, you will not. And then she came to me and she said, you probably will. And I wanted to go back with all my degrees and shove them up somewhere. And I was so furious. I'm so furious at her because it was such a mean, unnecessary thing. You'll go to college, you won't. You will, you won't. And believe me, there are many times when I wanted to write her a note and punch her in the nose with the words. And I think a lot of my writing has come out of that place of wanting to claim my place in society, to say I'm here whether you like it or not. I'm writing, I'm creating, I'm forming programs. I'm leading a creative writing program. I started a poetry center. I started a magazine. These are all the things I've done in my life. So don't just dismiss me because I'm lower class. Don't dismiss me because I'm Italian and you want to think I'm a mafioso. Somebody actually sat in my house eating my food and said that to me, to my face. Now I see the mafia leader on the cover of Time magazine, and I see that you really are Italian. It was so insulting. You're just eating my food, for God's sake. So I was quite angry. And so some of my poems come from that place. But mostly I'm a very optimistic person. And what I try to give my students is the sense that they can do anything if they work hard enough. You can't lie down and wait for somebody to come and discover you. You have to keep working, keep moving ahead. And I'm sure that your professors have taught you the same thing. You have to keep moving ahead, no matter what naysayers are in the background saying you can't do it. And I'll say that when I was 17, an older cousin asked me at the dinner table what I wanted to be. And I said, I wanted to be a poet. And he said, that is the most impractical ambition I've ever heard. He was an accountant. That was the most impractical. And my mother had this horrified look on her face, thinking, you're poor, how are you going to do it as a poet? I didn't realize that poets in general were rich. Yeah, I was too stupid to know that. Too ignorant to know that. But I knew that that's what I wanted to do. And my mother saved, she made 25 cents an hour sewing coats in the factories in Patterson. And she saved for a year to buy me a Smith Corona portable typewriter, pink, in a pink case, so I could be the writer I said I wanted to be. That's the way our parents helped us, by believing even our most outrageous dreams. And to them, that was an outrageous and impossible.
Now, since you were talking about your past experience, I would really love you to read one of the most incredible poems you've ever read. Public School Number 18, Patterson, New Jersey.
Thank you. You read it, because I think there are people who don't. Public School Number 18, Patterson, New Jersey. Miss Wilson's eyes, opaque as blue glass, fix on me. We must speak English. We're in America now. I want to say I am American, but the evidence is stacked against me. My mother scrubs my scalp raw, wraps my shiny hair in white rags to make it curl. Miss Wilson drags me to the window, checks my hair for lice. My face wants to hide. At home, my words smooth in my mouth. I chatter and am proud. In school, I am silent, grope for the right English words, fear the Italian word will sprout from my mouth like a rose. Fear the progression of teachers in their strict dresses, their Anglo-Saxon faces. Without words, they tell me to be ashamed. I am. I deny that rooted country even for myself. Let me turn the page. Want to be still and untouchable as these women who teach me to hate myself. Years later, in a white Kansas City house, the psychology professor tells me I remind him of the mafia leader on the cover of Time magazine. My anger spits venomous from my mouth. I am proud of my mother dressed all in black, proud of my father with his broken tongue, proud of the laughter and noise of our house. Remember me, ladies, the silent one. I have found my voice, and my rage will blow your house down.
Now your Italian voice. Gli occhi della signorina Wilson, opachi come vetro azzurro, sono fissi su di me. Dobbiamo parlare inglese, siamo in America ora. Voglio dire, sono americana, ma ogni prova è tesa a inchiodarmi. Mia madre mi sfrega la cute fino a scorticarla, avvolge i capelli lucenti in brandelli bianchi per arricciarli. La signorina Wilson mi trascina alla finestra, mi scruta i capelli cercando i pidocchi. Il mio viso vuole nascondersi. A casa le parole scivolano sulla mia lingua, chiacchiero e sono fiera. A scuola resto in silenzio. Annaspo per trovare le parole giuste in inglese. Ho paura che l'italiano spunti dalla mia bocca come una rosa. Temo la successione di insegnanti dai vestiti a fiorami, i loro volti anglosassoni, senza parole mi dicono di vergognarmi e mi vergogno. Rinnego quel paese stivale, calciandolo via persino da me stessa. Voglio rimanere composta e intoccabile, come quelle donne che mi insegnano a odiare me stessa. Anni dopo, in una casa bianca di Kansas City, il professore di psicologia mi disse che gli ricordo il boss mafioso sulla copertina del Time. La rabbia mi sprizza come veleno dalla bocca. Sono fiera di mia madre vestita di nero, fiera di mio padre con la sua lingua storpiata, fiera delle risa e del rumore della nostra casa. Vi ricordate di me, signore? Quella sempre zitta? Ho trovato la mia voce e la mia rabbia spazzerà via la vostra casa.
Thank you so much. You made us cry. You both made us cry. So what? This is a powerful poem. And I wonder, Maria, how your power, how the power in your words can reach every generation. We have generations of students here, and I have in mind many, many people who got in touch with your powerful words and are changed by your words. So my question is, how can poetry change the world? Which is a big question, but I know you believe poetry can make the difference.
I truly believe poetry can change the world. I believe it changed my world. It gave me a way. I was a shy, mute child, basically. I was afraid of everyone, afraid of everything, afraid of the teachers, afraid of any authority figure, afraid everywhere except in my house. But other than that, I felt that America was saying, you're all right, wrong. Your hair is wrong. Your clothes are wrong. You don't belong here. Go home. And one time my father went to apply for a job, and he walked all the way from Patterson to Passaic, following the railroad tracks. It was a long walk. And when he got there, they wouldn't give him the job. And they said, they spit at him and they said, go away. We don't want your kind here. And in a way, I felt a good deal of the time when I was growing up that was what I was hearing. Go away. We don't want your kind here. I've made it my life business not to take that kind of no from anybody, and to try to go forward even when I get pushed down on the ground, even when I've broken my leg, to get up and keep walking, even have to drag the leg. It doesn't matter. I'm going to keep walking. Now I've forgotten the question I was answering.
How can poetry change the world?
Oh, I think it can change the world, because if poetry is honest, if poetry I don't think esoteric poetry that's meant for 5 white guys from Harvard can change the world. But I think poetry that talks about ordinary life, that talks about love and loss and longing and grief and happiness and joy, poetry like that talks about what it means to be human. So it doesn't matter that the poems are written by an Italian American or who they're written by, because the poetry, the words, the honesty of the words forms a bridge between us. And it's a way for all of us to be more fully human, I think. And if we can recognize that, so much of the world is encouraging us to live on the surface. What I want my students to do, and what I want other poets to do, is to say, this is the world as I know it. I see the world through my eyes, and I'm going to show it to you through my eyes. And I want to meet you on this bridge that words form between us. That's basically what I think poetry does. And for me, it really was a way to save my life, because I could write something that I couldn't say, that I was afraid to say. I was afraid to speak up, but I could write it and be freed by writing about it. So it was a wonderful experience. I wanted to pass that on. I've done everything in my life that I've done has been to try to pass on that great gift that language gave me, to be able to find what I had to say about where I lived, the people I loved, and the people who cared for me, even though they might not have been acceptable to Americans. I have to say, these are my people. And that's what all of us have to say. I think any poet who just lives on the surface of the intellect is really not getting to the cave and that place in deep inside.
Thank you. I can tell you that you obviously changed my life, for example, as I was starting doing, and Elisabetta's as well, and probably our lives together. That makes a lot of sense, because we met because of you also. So that makes an evidence.
Yeah, so it's really wonderful. You create a circle of love and energy around you, and you've got this incredible power, gentleness, kindness, and also gratitude, because we're all deeply grateful to you.
We are grateful to you, and we really thank you to be here. We've been waiting for you. As you know, we tried to organize this event on 2020 when the COVID-19 decided we had to be shut up in our houses. So we are very, very happy to have you here, even 2 years later, 3 years later, no matter, time is not that important. Doesn't really matter. And I want you to read, I would like you to read this beautiful poem, talking about a photograph of you at 16 in a light blue dress, longing to be different from what you wear. So please.
In the photograph, I am 16. This was written in the IDS Poetry Workshop in Il Nibrio, Marana, Calabria, 2019. In the photograph, I am 16, dressed for high school prom. My dress is light blue, a color I chose because I wanted to be blonde and not me, with my olive-toned skin and my dark, frizzy hair. I am thin and high-breasted. The dress is fitted carefully over my body and slender waist, and then swirls out to a bonnet that is lifted by 2 crinolines. It's the 1950s. These are the kinds of clothes all the girls are wearing. I have on high heels and nylons held up by a garter belt. I was shy and uncomfortable. I barely spoke outside the house. Although at home with my Italian parents, family, I was exuberant, words tumbling over themselves as I spoke. It's only in poetry that I found a way to live in America. In poetry that I could express all the dreams that filled me with longing. In my poems, I could be the strong, independent person I imagined myself to be at some future time, not then when I was delicate and as easily broken as a butterfly's wings. I am 16, my life ahead of me, the long road I have yet to climb is just as shrouded in mystery as these Calabrian mountains where I sit writing this poem today. So many years have passed since that photograph in the dress that was pale blue. It took me years to realize it was covering the bright red spirit inside me.
This is the Italian translation of the poem by a student, actually, a young man named Yuri Sassetti, who translated this poem. Nella foto ho 16 anni e sono pronta per andare al ballo di fine anno. Ho un vestito blu chiaro, l'ho voluto io così, perché volevo essere bionda e non come ero io, con la pelle olivastra, i capelli scuri e crespi. Sono magra e ho un bel seno. Il vestito asseconda le mie forme, la vita sottile, e poi gira fino alla base, sollevata da 2 crinoline. Sono gli anni 50. Le ragazzine si vestivano così. Tacchi alti, un reggicalze sulle gambe. Ero timida, inquieta. Fuori parlavo a malapena, ma a casa, con gli italiani della famiglia ero esuberante, un torrente di vocali in piena quando parlavo. Solo nei versi trovai il modo per vivere in America. Solo nei versi ho dato voce a tutti i miei sogni, quelli che mi riempivano di bramosia. Solo nella poesia sono la donna forte e indipendente che volevo sempre diventare, e non quella ragazzina fragile di allora, delicata come le ali di una farfalla. 16 anni, tutta la vita davanti, una lunga salita ancora tutta da scalare, avvolta nel mistero come queste montagne calabre, dove oggi siedo a scrivere questi versi. Sono passati tanti anni da quella foto, da quel vestito blu chiaro, e ci ho messo tanti anni a capire che soffocava la fiamma luminosa della mia anima.
Maria, in your poems, there are 2 pivotal concepts. The first one is learning to love myself, and the second one is learning to let go. Can you please expand on that?
I'm not sure I've totally succeeded in learning to love myself, because I realize that I have a tendency to criticize myself all the time and make negative comments about myself. I try to stop my daughter from doing that, and I try to stop my students from doing that. But I feel compelled sometimes to make a negative statement about myself before someone else can make it. And I realized that my mother was very critical. She loved me and she would have done anything in the world for me. I knew if I needed her, all I had to do was call her and she would be at my house in 5 seconds. But she was trying to help me, and she would say, well, if I don't tell you who will, your friends won't tell you the truth. I'm going to tell you the truth. Sometimes the truth hurts and you don't really want to hear it. And so I think in a way, I started making negative comments first before somebody else could make them. And the second part of your question was about learning to let go. That's a harder one. And one of the things that I found as my children grew up, I love my children quite passionately. And when they go off to college and they move away and they move far away to other states, it's very hard to say, I'm just going to go on with my life. And I remember when my son went to college and he was away, and the first couple of weeks he was on the soccer team, so he had to go early, and they put him in a dorm all by himself. And he looked so lost and so lonely and so terrible. I was horrified. I couldn't stop thinking about him. I couldn't pass his room without wanting to cry. And so my daughter and I both have trouble letting him go. And we would go see him. Stupidly, we'll bring you a blanket, we'll bring you potato chips, we'll bring you cookies. We always had some dumb excuse why we had gone to see him. And finally, my daughter said, I don't think he wants us there anymore. And one day he said to me, I feel worse when you call. I feel lonelier when you call. So I stopped, obviously. I didn't want him to feel worse because, I mean, it's a little different with a boy and a girl. I found that my daughter didn't mind my calling her every 2.5 minutes, and she still doesn't. And she's 55 and has a partner and 2 stepchildren who are growing up. And I think we are very close. My son, I wouldn't dare call him every 2 minutes. His wife would kill me. And he calls me every Sunday night at 5:45, and I get 20 minutes. And I'm grateful to get those 20 minutes, let me tell you. And so I know he loves me, but I think I irritate him. I'm too noisy, I'm too loud, I laugh too much, all the things that were wrong with me, according to my son, who was a very controlled lawyer and keeps his emotions in check. But I still love him, and letting him go is very hard. And I think any of you who have children, when you have children, you will find how difficult it is to just release them. Now, I do have a friend who said to me, oh, I'm so glad they're going to college. I can't wait to get rid of them. Now, I never felt that about my children. And I drove back. My daughter went to Georgetown, which is in Washington. We lived in New Jersey. I drove back and forth to Georgetown probably 200 times a year because I had to have her in my arms. I had to see her. And there were times when I knew she needed me. And I didn't want her to be sad or lonely by herself. And so I was compelled to go there to see her. Now, my son went to law school at Georgetown, and he was glad to see me for about 5 minutes. And then it was, are you leaving? Yeah, kind of thing. But I could always go to my daughter because she was in the same town. So it is not only learning to let go of your children, the people that you love, but learning to let go of ideas you have about yourself, of preconceptions about yourself, about the way you look and the way you talk and what is important to you. Learning to let go, so that I always think there's an old lady who lives in your belly, and she knows more about what you need to write than anyone else. And so when you're writing, you have to stop trying to control it with your brain, and you have to let the old lady or the old man who lives in your belly have control, and not be trying to control the whole thing with your brain. Now, in graduate schools in the United States, now everything is called critical theory. So it's all brain, no guts. The writer is not important, it's the philosopher who's important. I say that's a BS. And I even put an A at the end of that, so like my mother would have. I don't think it's true that the writer is not important. I don't think it's true that the author is not important. It's not the philosopher who explains the work, but rather the poet or the novelist who writes the work, who knows what he's writing, because he is in the touch with the old lady or the old woman in his belly. And whether it's fiction or poetry, you need to be able to tell the truth about what it means to be human. If people are going to want to read your work for years after you've written it, that's what I believe.
Now, your poems are full of female figures. your sister, your aunt, your daughter, your grandmother, and you yourself define yourself as a Russian peasant doll in one of your poems. A Russian peasant doll. You open it and you find another one, you open it and you find another one. Yeah. Can you please expand on the importance of women in your life?
For me, my father was a very important figure in my life because he was a radical. He was a rabble rouser. He was politically very liberal. I mean, you know, he died 25 years ago. He'd be 120 if he had lived till now. And but he was very, very radical and very interested in what was going on in the world. He couldn't sometimes express it. His English wasn't that good, but in Italian, he could express it very well. And I admired him very much. But it was the women figures I felt in my life who really carried the family and carried all of us. My mother was 4'11", was a very strong character. And we all leaned on her. When she died, when she got cancer and got sick, none of us, not even my brother, could believe she was going to die. And he's a doctor, and he could not believe she was going to die because she seemed too powerful to die. She had like a magic to her. She was like, I can't explain. It was almost a witch-like quality that she could make you feel that you could do anything. She would make you feel 10 feet tall. And she herself seemed much bigger than she actually was in life. One time, I have to tell you this story. She looked at the neighbor across the street, and he was rebuilding his front steps. And she said, she went over and she watched him do it. She watched every step of the process. And then she said to my father, we have to go buy some cinder blocks, cement, all the other stuff she needed, bricks. And she knocked the front steps down. Now, she was a little woman. She knocked the front steps down and she rebuilt them. Cement, bricks. And when she finished, she said, oh, that was easy. It was like icing a cake. And she was a little tiny thing. That was easy. It was like icing a cake. And in a way that she was a model for me of female figures. For me, as a child, I saw myself as very small. And I still feel that there's a kind of shame I carry in my body that sees the younger me as this little tiny figure who was always afraid to be crushed, always afraid of everyone. And my mother really wasn't afraid of anybody. My mother just would decide she was going to do something and she would do it. She served as a great role model for me. And a lot of people, a lot of teachers I had, were very important to me, and this is actually both male and female teachers, but sometimes the female teachers were willing to be very motherly in their concern and very motherly in their wanting to bring you forward and bring you out of yourself, and make you feel that you could do anything you decided you were going to do. I truly believe that all my students can do anything they decide to do. As long as they're willing to work hard, as long as they're willing to sacrifice and to keep moving forward, they can do anything. I believe in them. And there was a student, in fact, who put on her, as her face page on her computer, Maria says you can do. I was very happy.
That's wonderful. Now, I'd really love you to read one of your latest poems, Mo Flanders, Zia Louisa, and Me.
Okay, I'm going to read this poem, and I'll say that some of the women characters in books reminded me of women characters in my life. Ma Flanders, Zia Louisa, and Me. Ah, Ma Flanders, of all the characters in those novels I read when I was still young and in graduate school, it's you I remember, flamboyant, sensual, in love with life. You always look for the main chance, and I could barely remember a name 5 minutes after I hear it, remember yours. I knew you were self-serving, but I love that you never lied about it, that you never made excuses for your behavior. And imagine you trying to make your way in 17th century England, where a woman on her own would have been vulnerable and afraid. You remind me of my Zia Louisa, that woman who married 4 times, that woman who wore a tan-colored corset with lace stays that had to be pulled tight to hold in her large breasts and belly. The woman who loved to dance the tarantella, her whole body exhilarating in moving and stomping. And though I know Mal only through a male writer's portrayal, I know Zia Louisa from my childhood. Knew her from watching her move like an Ironside battleship through life, past 3 dead husbands and onto a 4th, handsome, elegant Guillermo. Lived in a small apartment above us on 7th C Street in Paterson, New Jersey. My mother told me that in the night she'd hear Zia Louisa crying, but in the morning Zia would come down the back steps, her cotton dress stiff with stars, her love. And so work so well. Her lace handkerchief tucked in her sleeve, and she'd be smiling and laughing. She never told my mother what sorrow she carried hidden in her sleeve. The world does not need to know if it only wants to pretend nothing is wrong. Nothing is wrong, and you are mistaken if you think you heard while sobbing in the night.
E adesso la tua voce italiana. Ah, Maul Flanders, tra tutti i personaggi nei romanzi che leggevo quando ero ancora giovane all'università, è di te che mi ricordo, esuberante, sensuale, innamorata della vita. Cercavi sempre la grande opportunità e io, che a malapena rammento un nome sentito 5 minuti prima, mi ricordo il tuo. Sapevo che eri una rivista, ma mi piaceva che non lo nascondessi, che non accampassi scuse. E ti immagino mentre provavi a farti strada nell'Inghilterra del XVII secolo, dove una donna sola sarebbe stata vulnerabile, una vittima. Mi ricordi zia Luisa, quella donna che si sposò 4 volte, che portava un corsetto ambrato coi lacci di pizzo, da tirar stretti per contenere seni floridi e ventre. Che amava ballare la tarantella, l'intero corpo un fremito fra movimenti e battiti di piedi. E anche se conosco Moll solo da un libro, conosco zia Luisa fin dall'infanzia. L'ho osservata muoversi per la vita come un mezzo corazzato. Dopo 3 mariti morti, ancora un quarto, il bello, elegante zio Guglielmo. Vivevano nel piccolo appartamento sopra il nostro, nella 17th Street a Paterson, New Jersey. Mia madre mi diceva che di notte sentiva zia Luisa piangere, ma la mattina scendeva i gradini sul retro, il vestito di cotone perfettamente inamidato, il fazzoletto di pizzo infilato nella manica, tutta sorrisi e gioia. Non le ha mai detto quale pena si portasse dietro, nascosta in quella manica. Al mondo non interessa e sbagli se pensi di aver sentito singhiozzi disperati nella notte.
Grazie. These women in Maria's poems are really powerful. So I would like to invite you here, Antonella, who translated a most beautiful poem about the grandmother, Maria's grandmother, entitled Piecework. Yes, of course. But maybe Maria wanted to say something, please. Ok. Prendiamo l'inglese prima? Lei legge l'inglese, Piecework? Sì, Piecework. Ok, you can read in Italian, straight away.
A lot of people don't read it right away.
And the version in Italian is Nei tuoi panni. Di te conosco il nome, nel mezzo busto severo di una fotografia d'altri tempi, incorniciata in mogano. Lo sguardo fissa l'obiettivo, gli occhi grandi, scuri e impenetrabili, i capelli raccolti nello chignon. Accanto a te, tuo marito, nonno, in completo nero. Il colletto della camicia ben inamidato, siete distanti. Tra i corpi nessun contatto. Piccoli aneddoti filtrano dal silenzio di mio padre che ti avvolge in un velo. Tua madre ti fece venire a Filadelfia a vivere con lei, il tuo patrigno e i figli loro, e incontrasti l'uomo che divenne poi tuo marito. A 16 anni eravate già sposati, in meno di 2 mesi. L'anno dopo il primo figlio, poi un figlio all'anno, per 4 anni. Mi chiedo, che altro so di te? Che avevi i capelli color rame, così lunghi che alla sera toglievi le forcine e ti arrivavano ai fianchi. La prima volta che nonno ti vide passeggiare per Queen Street, si disse che ti avrebbe sposata. Che altro so? Che a 2 anni tua figlia sparì per 3 giorni. Lasciasti a un'amica gli altri figli per andare dalla strega del quartiere e ti indicò dove trovarla. E la trovasti, tutta ustionata, seduta a forza su una stufa a carbone rovente. Un giorno mio padre ti portò in treno coi figli a New York. Ti disse che andavi a trovare i parenti e invece ti mise su una nave e ti fece tornare in Italia. A San Mauro nonno andò da suo zio, il prete del paese, gli chiese un pezzo di terra per aiutare la famiglia. Lo zio rifiutò. Tuo marito partì per Buenos Aires, che eri incinta di 6 mesi. E poi, che altro so? Che nonno tornò in Italia e si arruolò nell'esercito e poi nacque il 7° figlio e lui se ne andò di nuovo in Argentina. Non è più tornato, nonno. Ti dissero che aveva un altro figlio. Grandma, nonna, chissà come ti avrei chiamata. Non ti ho mai conosciuta. Metto insieme schegge di te che sei morta più di 50 anni fa. Avevi paura quando ti lasciò, promettendo di mandarti soldi che non arrivarono mai. E quanto ci hai messo a capire che non sarebbe tornato? E le vecchie del paese, che si appassionavano alla tua storia e ci ripensavano, sedute in piazza nella polvere, con gli occhi neri a cui nulla sfugge. Ti guardavano, 24 anni, ancora bella e sola. Sola. Nessuno a sostenerti mentre cercavi di tenere unita la famiglia. Hai pianto, o hai urlato ai figli tuoi, o li hai picchiati a sangue. Cos'è successo a Filadelfia? Cos'è successo davvero a tua figlia? Sola, in un mondo di maschi che partivano in cerca di una vita nuova, lasciandosi alle spalle mogli e figlie, a volte dimenticandoli, come tuo marito si scordò di te. Mi metto nei tuoi panni. Che rabbia, che tristezza. Nonna, se solo avessi lasciato lettere, poesie, un diario, se solo t'avessi conosciuta. Io metto insieme schegge di memoria, le cose mai dette da mio padre. Ti cerco nel passato, nella donna che sono oggi, nel tuo essere parte di me e nella forza che mi dai.
And I have one more question, and then we read another poem, maybe. Maria, I wanted to ask you, what about nature? Because we have a lot of nature in your poems. We have farms, we have woods, rivers, Patterson, water. I'm very curious to know what is your relationship with nature.
My relationship with nature is not quite like my mother's, which she loved making a garden. She couldn't wait until spring so she could get her hands in the dirt. We interred her in a mausoleum, which is like a drawer. And I think of my poor mother, who loved the air, loved the sun, loved planting, loved smelling the herbs and the spices that she grew. Stuck in that box for her whole life. It's a horrible feeling. I'm going to be cremated because of it. I don't want to be stuck in there. But in any case, my relationship is a little bit like Emerson with nature. Nature scares me a little bit. Like, I don't want bugs crawling on me. I've gone camping, but I'm afraid of lightning in the woods. I'm afraid of big bugs. I'm afraid of bears. I'm afraid of foxes. I'm afraid of something that might bite me and drag me off into a cave. I love to look at nature through glass. And Emerson, who was known as a great nature writer, never went out into nature. he looked at it through his study window. And maybe that's what I do a lot of. I have a cherry tree outside my window. And when that cherry tree blooms, I know spring is here and summer can't be far behind. I love nature. I love the smell of nature. But I have to be honest and say, I don't really want to camp anymore. I did camp outside to please my husband, but I no longer, I want to sleep in fancy hotels, thank you. I don't want to sleep on the ground anymore. The last time we went camping, there was a gigantic thunderstorm and you could see the lightning bolts through the tent. And we had our children with us, they were little. And I made my husband get up. He wasn't afraid of the lightning. He had been a Boy Scout. He liked being outside. And so I made him get up and carry one of the children. I took the other one and we went into the ladies' bathroom, which was made of cement. And we sat, and I made him sit there. He was furious with me. But I said, I'm not sitting in that. The lightning's above us. There's a tree above us. And the tree fell down during the night. So I was right. The old lady who was in my belly knew that I shouldn't stay in that tent with the lightning and the thunder and the tree weaving above us. And when we got back to the tent, I spent most of the morning with a Canadian woman who had also been woken up by the storm. And we had a wonderful, I've never been to see her. I've never seen her again. We had wonderful conversation about our fears related to nature. And I love flowers. I have lots of plants. I love them. I used to be better at taking care of them when I was in better physical condition myself. But I was never the gardener. My mother, when she died, 3 months before she was diagnosed with cancer, she planted this huge garden. And she only had 50 by 100 plot of land and her house was on it. So it wasn't a big, but she did what the Italians do. She planted plants underneath other plants, you know, they were used to planting on the side of the mountain. So she knew how to grow a huge amount of things out of that garden. And when she was dying, my daughter and I, and my daughter's strong, she's young, we went out into the garden and we'd pick tomatoes and peppers and zucchini and zucchini flower. We brought all the stuff she loved in so she could see what her garden was doing. It almost seemed as though the garden knew she was dying. And it kept producing and producing and producing. So every day we would carry a basket full of produce into my mother, and she was so happy that the garden was growing, and it kept on growing, even though she knew she was dying. She wouldn't admit it, but she knew that she was dying. But I think it gave her a kind of courage and hope to see that those tomatoes and the peppers and cucumbers and all the stuff that she had grown in her garden. She was a little tiny woman. My father was partially paralyzed, so he really couldn't help her in the garden. She did it all herself. And it was so amazing what she was able to produce in that garden. I don't have that kind of green thumb, but I do love looking at flowers. I just don't want to be bitten by a bee.
Now, before we read another poem, I would like to ask you something about your other facet among the many facets of your personality and your artistic world. That is your facet as an artist, as a visual artist. You are a painter, you use this mixed technique with collage and everything. How did you start and how are you going to develop it?
When I was a young woman, I painted, but I painted the way everybody painted at that time, abstract expressionist. And then I had children, I was busy, I was teaching, I was doing a million things, and the painting kind of fell by the wayside. And then I became friends with Diane DePrima, who's also an Italian American, but a very famous beat writer. I'm not a beat writer. She was much more risk-taking than I was. She had like 5 husbands and a child, but she won. I'm afraid I was married to the same man for 47 years. I'm not a risk taker in that way, but she was, and I loved her. We had such wonderful times together, and we would go on reading tours together. And it was wonderful for me because everybody knew who she was. So I'd get 500 people at a reading because they came to hear Diane, not me. But I would sell hundreds of books because suddenly I had a new audience, and an audience that was not expecting my poems. However, before we went, we had a reading in Santa Cruz. And before we left San Francisco, we had been reading up north in California. And we went back to San Francisco, and she said, I'm going to take you to this art supply store that I love. And I thought she was taking me there for herself, that because I knew she painted and that she was going to buy art supplies for herself. She goes, oh no, you're buying art supplies for you. I thought I was going to have a heart attack. I thought I haven't painted since when I was 27 years old. And I was way beyond that, let me tell you. But because she asked me to do it, we got to the motel in Santa Cruz, and she went in her room and I went in my room, and she said, now paint. And I mean, I was too intimidated to say, I can't paint, I can't draw a straight line, I can't. Okay, so I went into the room and I bought paper and everything and paints. And so outside the window of the room were these rose bushes, and they were beautiful. And I tried to draw the rose bushes and I couldn't do it. So I kept crumpling them up and crumpling them up. And then I thought, wait a minute, what do you tell your students? It doesn't have to be anybody else's poem. It just has to be your poem. And so I said to myself, it doesn't have to be anybody else's rose. It just has to be your rose. You have to have the courage to put down what you see. And that started my journey as a very untutored, self-taught artist. And I'm having such a wonderful time with it. And I have a big show coming up in September and October at an art center. And I'm very excited by it, very thrilled by it. A lot of my paintings have sold. I'm so surprised because I don't have the talent of an ant, but I have a great time with it. They're not anybody else's women, they're my women. I paint a lot of women, and I have a hard time painting men. I don't know why I like men, but I have a hard time painting them. It's easier to paint a woman. It just is for me. And so I have a lot of paintings of women, and I've sold a lot of paintings. I'm proud to say that because I thought nobody's gonna want any of mine. This stuff is a baby. A baby could have done this, but I'm having such a wonderful time with it. And I'm so grateful to Diane for having opened that door for me. Sometimes something that happens to you changes your life, even when you're old. Because I was no spring chicken at that point. But all of a sudden, I was in this whole new career. And my son laughed because he thinks I'm a little cracked. And he said, first you go off and you be a poet, to do what everybody said you couldn't be a poet. And now you're an artist. And I don't understand how you do it. You have a lot of nerve. And I said, you're right. That's exactly what I have. A lot of nerve.
Fantastic. Now, I think we can have maybe a couple more poems. I would like you to read When the Stars Were Still Visible, which is one of my most favorite poems, I must say. Read it in Italian as well. But people really want to hear your voice. So I see the big smiles of my students. Yeah, and I will read it in Italian.
I can't read it.
I will read it in Italian.
When the stars were still visible. In the photo, I'm on the back step of the 16th failed family tenement on Fifth Avenue in Patterson, where I was born. I'm squinting into the sun, my nose wrinkled, my eyes closed against the glare. I am 2 years old, my hair a curly cap on my head. It looks blonde, though I know it couldn't have been. I wonder if I'm remembering my daughter at 2, sitting in the little rocky chair on the front porch on Oak Street in Kansas City. Her hair was all blonde ringlets. Strange how memory is like the fragments of a poem puzzle. Remember the green blackout shades in our apartment in Patterson in 1944. Remember my father dressed as the devil for a concert party at Società Celentana on Butler Street. Remember the silver ball Si Guglielmo made from the foil inside the Camel cigarettes he smoked. that stained his fingers yellow. So many memories swirl like bits of color in a kaleidoscope, and so impossible to explain. Remember 17th Street with Mrs. Ginelli always fainted when she got upset, and the old man who ran the candy store that was so filthy no one bought anything there, and the big garage in the Ginelli's backyard where we put on plays until something happened, I don't know what, something to do with playing doctor behind her improvised curtain, and then we weren't allowed to play there anymore. Remember Guillermo's garden with tomatoes and zucchini and corn, and the vacant lot next door that seemed so huge you'd think we had all of New Jersey to play in. Until I see it years later, covered with asphalt and garages. And I realized that the entire block, my world until I was 11, wasn't that big, and certainly the lot small and now so ugly. Remember when stars in Patterson were still visible in the sky, and I didn't know 17th Street was in a city. Remember the sweet smell of marigolds and daisies in the vacant lot, and our house full of food and laughter, our family together under the kitchen light, the company of honorary aunts and uncles. Outside, our friends gathered to play stickball in the street, hours to fill with games and books and dreaming. How lucky I was, how lucky, Patterson glowing and sparkling like a silver ball in my hands.
Nella foto sono sui gradini sul retro del caseggiato di 6 famiglie, sulla Fifth Avenue a Patterson, dove sono nata. Strizzo le palpebre al sole, naso arricciato, occhi abbagliati dalla luce. Ho 2 anni, un casco di riccioli in testa. Sembrano biondi, ma so che è impossibile. E mi chiedo se non sto invece ripensando a mia figlia di 2 anni, seduta sulla seggiolina a dondolo in veranda a Oak Street, Kansas City. I capelli, una cascata di boccoli d'oro. Strano come la memoria si ricomponga in tasselli, come un puzzle. Ricordo gli occhi verdi della nostra, scusate, gli scudi verdi della nostra abitazione a Patterson nel 1944. Ricordo mio padre, vestito da diavolo per la festa in maschera alla società cilentana Butler Street. Ricordo la pallina d'argento che lo zio Guglielmo faceva con la stagnola delle camel che fumava, che gli macchiavano le dita di giallo. Così tanti ricordi volteggiano, frammenti di colori in un caleidoscopio, impossibili da spiegare. Ricordo la 17th Street con la signora Gianelli, che sveniva sempre quando si arrabbiava, e il vecchio del negozio di caramelle così sporco che nessuno ci comprava mai niente. E il grosso garage nel cortile dietro casa Gianelli, dove ci andavamo a divertire finché non successe qualcosa, non so bene cosa, ma ci entrava a giocare al dottore, dietro un paravento improvvisato, e poi ci hanno proibito di giocarci ancora. Ricordo il giardino di zio Guglielmo, coi pomodori, le zucchine, il mais e il terreno vuoto accanto che ci sembrava enorme, come se avessimo l'intero New Jersey per giocare. Finché l'ho visto anni dopo, pieno d'asfalto e di parcheggi. E ho capito che l'intero isolato, il mio mondo fino agli 11 anni, non era poi così grande, e certamente quel campo, piccolo e ora così brutto. Ricordo Patterson, quando le stelle in cielo si vedevano ancora, e non sapevo che la 17th Street era in città. Ricordo il profumo dolce delle calendule e delle margherite nel terreno vuoto e la nostra casa piena di cibo e di risate e la famiglia unita sotto la lampada della cucina, la compagnia di zii e zie d'adozione. Fuori gli amici si trovavano in strada per una partita di stickball, ore da riempire di giochi e libri e sogni. Quant'ero fortunata, quanto! Patterson luminoso e brillante, come una pallina d'argento tra le mani.
So, and I was thinking about so many years dreaming about Italy and then coming back to Italy when you were 38, right? Your first trip to 38. And I was wondering about Calabria and your trips to Calabria. Actually, Maria is here coming from Calabria, where she has been teaching for a couple of weeks. So I was thinking how Italy is different in your dreams and how from what you found actually here.
Say it's so much better than I expected. I mean, I expected a lot. My parents made it seem like paradise. So I expected a great deal, but I love the people. I love their warmth. I love the food. I love the plants. I love the way everything is made beautiful, whether it's by adding plants or adding art or whatever. Everything is always made beautiful. I don't find that, and I don't want to insult anybody from some other country, but I have to say that I've traveled all over the world, and I don't see that so much in other countries. That willingness or ability to take even a poor place and make it beautiful by growing flowers, by flowers hanging from the balconies and the terraces. I spent a long time in France because one of my friends moved there, and I kept looking for the flowers. I couldn't find them. And in Italy, no matter what little street you go on, there's a little balcony with a lot of flowers hanging off it. It seems to me that the Italians have a sense of beauty and a sense of art that's very deep. A long time ago, 1988, I think, I went on a reading tour of Sicily because I won the American Literary Translators Award. And my translators invited me to go on a 10-day tour of Sicily. And we went to different parts of Sicily. In some places, mostly they didn't let me read. They let me read one poem in English, and then the rest they read in Italian. It was the most incredible thing to me. I went to a little town called Gerasicolo, and it was at the top of a mountain. It was very isolated. Obviously it was not a wealthy town. We got there and I could still walk then. And the library where the program was going to be held was on the top floor of this library, of this municipal building. And so we climbed up the stairs. It was about 110 in the shade. It was so hot. And I'm thinking, who's going to be, there's a little town. Who's going to be there to listen to poetry? There were 750 people there. And they were all dressed up. They were dressed up. They were coming to a poetry reading. They were ready to, and it went on for like 5 hours. How they lasted to it, I don't know. But there were people who talked about my work. And then there were people who read my work in Italian. And then more talking about the work. And the mother and father and the kids were all together and all dressed up. The teenagers are sitting in the back of the room, quiet, paid attention. It was truly an amazing experience for me. And I went from one place in Sicily to another. They were really wonderful. And they had arranged all these different readings, one in a conservatory of music, another one in a wealthy person's house, where they had a string quartet playing, and they also read my poems. Another one where it was young people who read my poems, high school people who read my poems in a municipal building. I can't tell you how amazing it was to me and how I fell in love with it. I already had fallen in love with Italy, but I fell in love with the people of Italy even more, because the more people I met, the more that I realized there was a kind of song in their hearts and a joy in the way they lived and an ability to appreciate and admire an art. What I saw in Sicily was that the artist community and the poetry community came together to support each other. That doesn't happen so much in the United States. Mostly they're jealous of each other, but in these little towns in Sicily, the artists all came out for the poets all went out for the artists. And I thought it was such a wonderful thing. Artists all over Sicily gave me their work to take back to the United States. And every time I've come back, it's been a new thing, Another time, one of my poems was used in the Italian exam that people had to take to graduate from high school. And a man from San Mauro Cilento, who was the cultural minister of this town that probably has 600 people in it, he wrote to me and he said, "Is this San Mauro Cilento? Is this that San Mauro?" And I said, "Yes, it is." And he said, "Well, we want to invite you to make you an honorary citizen of the town, and we're going to produce a book of your poems in Italian and English, and we're inviting you here to read and to accept our award and to become an honorary citizen of this town." And that was not the only time they asked me to go there. It was so wonderful. I brought my daughter with me, and they gave bouquets of flowers. They gave me needlework. It was so moving and made me feel so connected to that town, but to all Italians, really. And I think particularly, obviously, I'm a Southern Italian, so particularly Southern Italians, I felt really close, and they understand my dialect, and they don't make fun of it particularly. They may be making fun of it behind my back, but at least to my face, they're not making fun of my broken Italian. Anyway, I love Italy. I've come to love it more and more. The more times I've come back. In 2019, I taught a workshop for a couple of weeks to people who came mostly from America. One guy from Africa, another from Australia, and some from Italy, but most of the people were Americans or Canadians. And it was a wonderful workshop, and we produced a book of poems and photographs from that workshop. And then we've had readings from it. And we were supposed to come back in 2020, but had to cancel it. And so we had it this year in the Grand Hotel San Miguel. And it's such a beautiful hotel. If you have a chance to go there, it's right on the Tyrrhenian Sea. It's incredibly beautiful. And so I've just had a wonderful 2 weeks. I will never stop loving in Italy and feeling I really am an Italian, even though Italians call me the Americano.
And I believe Italy loves you back. Loves you back, absolutely. So to close here, and then maybe we'll leave some little time for questions, we would like to read 2 poems that we particularly fell in love with. Let's move from December. Let's start with December Dusk. Okay. Do you want to read in Italian, just in Italian?
Tramonto di dicembre. Le cose si dissolvono al tramonto quando il buio scaccia la luce e le ombre distendono le loro lunghe dita. Le cose allora cambiano. Anche il suono della vecchia casa cambia e si incupisce. Gli alberi minacciosi strisciano sul pavimento, mentre la paura sfiora le ossa. Tiriamo le tende, accendiamo le luci, ma non riescono a contenere questo sussurro che ci avvolge. Tremiamo guardando la nostra immagine allo specchio che si imbruna. Sbattiamo le palpebre e il sangue batte contro la pelle sottile.
Now we close with a poem which was written from a terrace in Calabria. Just last week, 3 years ago, though. Do you want me to read in Italian? Sure, ok, salgo in Italia. Questa mattina sulla terrazza. Questa mattina sulla terrazza ad Albidona la tortora mi accoglie con il suo verso ripetitivo. Guardo dall'alto gli ulivi piantati, fitti, in filari sotto di me, che portano al mare Ionio disteso davanti come un quadro astratto, meraviglioso quando cambia colore, turchese, verde, blu, lavanda. Calabresi mi dicono che il colore cambia con le correnti e per quanti musei io abbia visto in tutto il mondo, mai ho visto niente del genere. Sembra un mare di seta, come quelle sciarpe che fanno gli artisti. L'aria profumata, la brezza gentile che mi solleva i capelli, l'immobilità rotta soltanto dai gridi degli uccelli mi confortano come una veste di seta sulla mia pelle. Thank you, Maria. Grazie.
I really appreciate the warmth of this audience and the attention you pay to my work. It makes me feel much younger than I actually am. It's sort of shaved off by 10 years, maybe. 15 would be good. Okay.
Yes, Ludovica. Would you like to come here? Come. Or maybe, no, so that there is. No, it's better because otherwise, turn the camera.
Thinking about your life experience and talking about the current and delicate issues of bullying, do you think that the no acceptance of oneself could be one of the main reasons that pushing the victim to give power to his bully? Okay. Thinking about your life experience and talking about the current and delicate issues of bullying, do you think that the no acceptance of oneself could be one of the main reasons that pushing the victim to the give power to his bully?
Yeah, I do. I think that's one of the reasons why bullies pick on people. They sense are weak or are afraid. And I've learned that in my life that you have to stand up to bullies and you have to only almost push them down or they will push you down. But I didn't know that when I was a kid. And when I was a child, I let them push me around. And I let myself be bullied. I saw other people in my grammar school class being bullied because they were fat or awkward, or there was always some reason why they would pick on them, but always because they were they sensed that they were vulnerable in some way. And I think that that lack of self-acceptance and that distorted self-image makes it easy for the bully to pick on you. And I have to say that in one way I was lucky because I looked like a little innocent little rabbit. And because of that, they didn't really pick on me that much. I probably picked on myself more than they picked on me. But there were people in my class who were picked on because they were chubby or they were awkward or they were not good looking. There was always a reason, some crazy reason. And they must have sensed, the bully always senses a vulnerability, senses that you're weak in some way and they can. And I think one of the things I learned as I grew older is that you seize power from the bully when you confront the bully, when you say, I'm not letting you do that to me. And when you attack them, they crumble like little snowflakes. I learned that, but it took me a long time.
Yes. What advice would you give to young people today who feel insecure and do not accept themselves?
Okay, the first thing I say to my students when they come into a graduate course is I want you to take a picture of yourself today. And I don't care what you think you look like right now, but I want you to take a picture of yourself right this minute. When you go home, take a picture, have it developed, put it in an envelope and mark almost open in 20 years. Because when you open that picture in 20 years, you're going to see just how incredibly beautiful you are. I don't think you young people realize how glorious you are when you're young. What a flower there is to your faces and your skin when you're young. You don't appreciate it. And you don't see yourself in the right way. You see yourself in a distorted way. And I think the way I saw myself was as too dark, too ugly. My hair was too frizzy. It always stuck out from my head like a kinky tin. I just never felt right. And then I have to say, when my husband died, my daughter put a picture of us on a board, put different pictures of us on a board, and it was in the place where we had his memorial. And I looked at the picture of this woman my husband was leaning over. And I said to my daughter, "Who is that woman?" She said, "What do you mean? Who is that woman? It's you." I said, "It can't be me." And because here was this exuberant, glowing, alive person, and I thought I was ugly as sin. And my husband was very handsome, Irishman. I have to probably marry him because of that. And I produced very beautiful children, I must say. But when I looked at myself, I didn't see myself. And I argued with my daughter. I said, "That can't be me. Look at her." And she said, "It is you. I guarantee it." So that was an eye opener for me. It is you. But we don't see ourselves in that way. And so what I want to tell all of you is stop picking at yourself. Stop thinking I'm too short or too tall or too round or not skinny enough or not masculine enough or whatever the hell you're telling yourself. Stop. Take a picture of yourself now. Take it out in 20 years. You're going to be really surprised at how glorious you are. You're really glowing at your age. You just don't know it. You don't realize it. And there's something so alive when I look at your faces. And I can remember being your age, although it's a distant memory at this point. But I can remember being your age and what negative thoughts I had about my own self. And I hope that you kick those thoughts out the way I've tried to kick the crow out of my life. I haven't succeeded too well, but I've been trying and I'll keep on trying. You have another question? Okay, scream into the microphone. Okay, can't go a word to say.
We know that you tried in every possible way to erase your traces of Italianity, and that you rediscover your Italianity at the age of about 40. How, when, and why did this need and desire to rediscover your origins snap inside of you?
It's I have a hurricane. Maybe this hurricane value is going dead. I know, but I think that is the older I got, the more I grew up, I realized what my parents had given me. One thing they'd given me that no rich person could have given me was the idea that if you're going to live in the world, you have to make a difference. And that was my father's real belief. You had to make a difference. You had to be brave. You had to step out in front of the battle, even if it cost you. You still had to be brave enough to go out there and fight the good fight. And he really believed that, and he taught that to us. And I feel that that made me very rich. And the other thing I learned from my parents was that there was always room at our table for another person. Even when we didn't have money, even when we didn't have 5 cents, there was always pull up a chair, have some food. And there was a way of welcoming people in. I've tried to live my life based on those two principles. There's always pull up a chair, and there's always fight for what you believe in, go out in the world and make a difference, try to make changes in the world that will make the world a better place than when you arrived. And I've really tried very hard to do that in my life. And I hope I've succeeded in many ways. When I started the Poetry Center in Patterson, which is an inner city, people said, nobody's going to come to Patterson to listen to poetry. The Poetry Center is 43 years old. We've had people from all over the world read. We've had the most famous poets in America come to read in the series. The series is going strong after 43 years. So what I want to say is to those people who said it can't be done, I did it.
Is there any other question, any other curiosity? Take the chance. Yes, please. Right, okay.
I think there's a big line between those things, because I hope what happens when you're a narrative poet is that you turn this life into experience into something that is art, because it moves people, it makes them cry, it makes them laugh, it makes the hair on the arms stand up. If it's just babbling away about your life, no, it doesn't work. But if you can form it in such a way that actually forms this bridge between us, then I think you're doing something different from just writing a kind of emotional catharsis. I think you're creating art out of the material of your memory, your past, the things you've learned in your life, the things you've seen in your life, the people you've loved and lost, become a part of the fabric that you weave in the poem. And I think in the poem, it then becomes something that's artful rather than just vomiting out details of your life. I hope that is a clear explanation of what I see as the drawing line, as the dividing line. I think a lot of very intellectual poets will say, oh, who needs another poem about the grandmother? Well, I do. I need another poem about a grandmother. Grandmothers were not written about. I had a friend who was a very well-known scholar, and he said, who needs a book by women? Who needs an Italian about an Italian's women poets? Who needs it? You guys have had the floor for years. We need it. That's who needs it. We need it. We need to be able to write about what it means to be a woman in this century. What does it mean to be a woman, to be alive, to be human? But what does it mean to try to struggle against all the boundaries that are paid? And there are less boundaries now than I think when I was growing up. There were a lot of constrictions, a lot of things you were not allowed to do. I think that's less true, but it's not 100% not true now either. And there's a lot of ways that women are kept out. And in the literary establishment, I think that's particularly true. And so I'm just worried by the young women who feel that they have to write very esoteric, very incomprehensible writing in order to be paid attention to. And I say, write about what is in your gut, write about what you care about, write about the people you know. You have to try to make art out of the people you know, the people you grew up with, the people you've loved. You turn them into a kind of art so that other people can also see them and hear them, try to capture their voices, capture what they would have said in this situation. That's the way we preserve them. That's the way we keep them alive. And this is how art does. You look at great art and you see a figure perhaps, but the figure reminds us so much about a kind of beauty in nature, a beauty in the body, a beauty in the way somebody's portrayed in sculpture or in a painting. There is so much that is captured in art, and I think it's captured in poetry as well. I grant you there are people who would hate my poem. They just want poems that don't make any sense. That's all they want. They want language poetry. I hate that kind of stuff. I think it's bullshit. I think it kind of tries to put a scrim around the world so that they don't have to show the people they really are. And I'm not putting up with it anymore. I call it out when I see it. I try to stop people from doing that because I think I tried to hide for a long time. And I'm trying to push my students not to hide And so I'm thrilled when my student Jose Antonio Rodriguez gets 5 poems in the New Yorker. I'm thrilled when I see another student getting published in Poetry Magazine. I really, there's a Jewish, I think it's a Yiddish expression, fell. And I feel that I fell for my students. I feel so proud of them for what they've done. It's not easy to do what you think is right when the rest of the world is saying, oh no, poetry has to be incomprehensible. It has to be all beautiful language. You can't have a poem about a mother or a grandmother. I say, go drown yourself.
Maybe one last question. Yes.
Since I am a teacher, I was wondering if you could give me some advice to be a great teacher like you are and like Professor Marino is.
I think that the best advice I could give is to really open your heart to your students. See them as human beings, see their difference and admire it and treasure it and make them treasure it. Don't make fun of them. And I've had teachers who are mean, who are sarcastic, who are rude, who are always angry. To be a good teacher, you have to love the students. You have to want them to succeed. Certainly, I taught at a big university where some of the professors are jealous of the students. They were literally jealous of their own students. Instead of feeling happy for them when something happened, they were jealous and angry that something good had happened for them. And I say, if you're going to be a good teacher, you can't do that. You have to feel almost as though these students are your children and that it's up to you to nurture them out into the world, whatever that takes, but to try to give them courage, to try to encourage them to be the absolute best they can be, and to try to see that bit, not to be sarcastic. I remember I had a teacher in 7th grade. Oh, he was a nasty old man. And he was always saying sarcastic things. And so I lived with this through his class only by that waspy old man I wanted to kill by the end of the. I imagined myself in the covered wagon in the little house on the prairie, moving away from his class. So through the whole semester, I rode out into Kansas. I have to say, I've never been in Kansas. I never left Patterson, but in my imagination, I could go where Laura Ingalls Wilder took her characters. And that's the wonderful thing about books, that they can take you places you can't go. I did not leave Patterson for a long time, but in a way, those books took me there. The fact that I love to read, it was a way of finding a way out of what was a very narrow and restricted life in many ways. And the expectations were very low in my neighborhood about what you can do, not in our house, because my parents really valued education and wanted us to be the best we could be. But in a lot of houses, if somebody said, I just had a student in Calabria and she won, she was admitted to Rhode Island School of Design, and her mother said, well, we can't afford to do that. You have to go to work. Now, my parents never said that. They didn't have 2 cents to rub together. I got a scholarship, that was it, go ahead. And they wanted me to be the best I could be. And that's what we have to want for our students. I love the students. I love how different they all are, how their backgrounds are all different, and yet they can come together in a classroom and open each other up to new experiences. I know you'll be a wonderful teacher.
Now, really, thank you, Maria. You've been wonderful as usual. And I mean, you've given us a huge present today. So we are really, really happy, and grazie. We love you.
And grazie for speaking such wise words. I mean, it is incredible. We go through many conferences and talkings, Elisabetta knows something, but it is so difficult to hear words that are like arrows, exactly, una freccia, arrows to the heart. And you're so generous. You gave us so much. I mean, I'm talking about Elisabetta and I, but I think you gave the world so much, which makes a lot of sense after all you said today and after the many poems. But I want to ask you something. I need many of your poems. So my idea is that we wait for you here soon with many other poems to translate. I wait for you here soon with many other poems, and we will translate them. Okay, good. We'll go on translating, and I feel as a translator, let me say something about translations, and as a translator and as a teacher of translation also, I feel that when I translate Maria Gillan's poems, I bring her back home. You're welcome. I love you.
And it's not just that, you really empower the translator and empower every person who reads and translates and gives a new voice to your voice. So really thank you so much, because I learn so much from you every day. So thank you. E grazie. No, it's
I could see by the number of students who are here for these two women that they are wonderful teachers, that they really give their hearts to their class. They try to see that how people grow as a reflection of love. I never want to because I know what it's like to be one close to God, being shade white, not being white enough.
yeah. And I think there are 3 generations here. There is you, the 2 of us, and all the young people here in the audience. So thank you again.
Take a picture of yourself today. Take that in 20 years. You're gonna be shocked at how gorgeous you are.
Photo, voglio una photo. They want a picture again.